Hello everyone, hurry up to join to the today live session, guys. I hope you all will be doing great for the today, guys. Let's join to the today live session. I have to love and respect for you joining to the stream, guys, making the like and subscribing to the channel. Yeah, guys, that's great for the today, John, guys. And I have a lot of love and respect for you joining. Sonu, how are you, Sonu? Thank you so much for joining this, Sonu. How are you, my lovely brother? A lot of love and respect for you joining, Sonu. How are you, Sonu? Where are you from watching, my lovely brother? Brother, do my name. Why not, my lovely brother? Thank you so much for you joining, my dear. A lot of love and respect for you joining. Thank you, Sonu. How are you, dear Sonu? Thank you so much for joining to such a ring, my dear. You all are very respectable for me. I'm fine. I'm from Korea and Iraq. And oh, thank you so much for joining. Hi, Fatih. How are you, Fatih? Thank you for joining, my lolly. Thank you, Faith. How are you, Faith? Thank you so much for joining to such a ring. Sticky dance upon my dear. How are you, dear Faith? How are you, Faith? Thank you so much for joining to such a ring, dear Faith. Sticky, how are you, Sticky? Thank you so much for joining to such a ring, dear Sticky. Thank you so much for your joining. Kalia, how are you, dear Kalia? Thank you so much for joining, Kalia. How are you, dear Kalia? A lot of love and respect for you joining. You should do the super chat, guys, and you're welcome, and send the laughing disco. Thank you so much for your joining. Esther, how are you, Esther? Thank you so much for joining, Esther. Leon, how are you, dear Leon? A lot of love and respect for you joining, dear Leon. Thank you so much for joining. Hi, King. How are you, King? Thank you so much for joining. Leo, how are you, dear Leo? How are you, dear Leo? Thank you so much for the likes. Olen, how are you, dear Olen? Every respected member have to write your name in the chat. Lalon, how are you, dear Lalon? Thank you so much for your joining, dear Lalon. Leah, how are you, dear Leah? Thank you so much for joining to City Ring. To write your name in the chat, guys. Thank you so much for your joining. All bay, how are you, dear all boy? How are you, all boy? Thank you so much for joining there. Thank you so much for joining. Jamia, how are you, dear Jamia? Thank you so much for your joining, my dear. Sarah, how are you, dear Sarah? Thank you so much for joining to sit room, dear Sarah. Thank you so much for your joining. Lalo, how are you, dear Lalo? How are you, dear Lalo? How are you, Lalo? Thank you so much for your joining, dear Lalo. A lot of love and respect for your joining. Jabril, how are you, Jabril? Thank you so much for joining to sit room, dear Jabril. A lot of love and respect for your joining. Thank you so much for your joining. Tana, how are you, dear Tana? Thank you so much for joining, dear Tana. Every respecting member to send the laughing disco for lost state and do the super chat, guys. Andy, how are you, dear Andy? Thank you so much for joining, dear Andy. How are you, Andy? Thank you so much for your joining. Lena, how are you, dear Lena? Thank you so much for joining, dear Lena. How are you, Lena? Livia, how are you, dear Livia? Thank you so much for joining. Please, guys, someone do the super chat for helping to completing my goal, guys. Thank you so much for your joining. Wasim, how are you, Wasim? Thank you so much for joining to sit dear Wasim. Nicholas, how are you, Nicholas? Thank you so much for joining to sit Nicholas. Thank you so much for your joining, dear Nicholas. Ari, how are you, Ari? Thank you so much for joining to sit dear Ari. Jose, how are you, dear Jose? Thank you so much for joining, Jose. And yeah, guys, to write your name in the chat, guys. Marlo, how are you, Marlo? Thank you so much for joining to sit dear Marlo. A lot of love and respect for you joining. Athena, how are you, dear Athena? Thank you so much for joining to sit dear Athena. How are you, Athena? Bala, how are you, dear Bala? A lot of love and respect for you joining, dear Bala. Thank you so much for joining, my dear. Hurry up, guys, making the like and subscribing to the channel. Ala, how are you, dear Ala? Thank you so much for joining to sit Ala, how are you, Ala? To write your name in the chat, guys. Adila, how are you, Adila? Thank you so much for joining to sit dear Adila. Every respected member do the like and subscribing to the channel. Aleph, how are you, Aleph? Yeah, guys, click on the goal to completing my goal, guys. Thank you so much for joining once again. Osman, how are you, Osman? Osman there. Do the super chat for my appreciation to helping me complete my goal, my dear. Thank you so much for your joining. Ali, how are you, Ali? Thank you so much for joining. Anna, how are you, dear Anna? Kathy, how are you, dear Kathy? Thank you so much for joining to a stream, Kathy. How are you, Kathy? Thank you so much for your joining. Azadin, how are you, Azadin? Thank you so much for joining to a stream, Azadin. How are you, Azadin? To write your name in the chat, guys. Georg, I write your name there. To write your name in the chat, guys. Maxwell, how are you, dear Maxwell? Thank you so much for joining to stream, dear Maxwell. How are you, Maxwell? Asik, how are you, Asik? Thank you so much for joining to stream, Asik. Leo, how are you, Leo? Thank you so much for joining to stream. Please helping me to completing my goal, guys. Uh, Tia, how are you, dear Tia? Thank you so much for joining, dear Tia. Thank you so much for your joining. Asmoner, how are you, Asmoner? Thank you so much for joining to stream. Hurry up, guys, to write your name in the chat. Lini, how are you, dear Lini? Thank you so much for joining to stream, dear Lini. Hello, dear Leah. How are you, Leah? Every respected person to send the laughing disco to do the super chat, guys. Alright, Renana, how are you, Renana? Thank you so much for joining, dear Renana. Cynthia, how are you, Cynthia? Thank you so much for joining, Cynthia. Please, guys, Asia, how are you, dear Asia? Thank you so much for joining to stream. Please helping. Your name is Scala. How are you, Scala? Thank you so much for joining to stream, dear Scalia. How are you, Scalia? Please helping me to complete my goal, guys. Sam, how are you, dear Sam? Thank you so much for joining to stream, dear Sam. Tiffany, how are you, dear Tiffany? Thank you so much for joining, dear Tiffany. Please, guys, encourage the likes, guys. Encourage the likes. Alvaro, how are you, Alvaro? Alvaro, how are you, Alvaro? Thank you so much for joining, dear Alvaro. Thank you so much for your joining. Hurry up, guys, making the like and subscribing to the channel. Allah, I'm Messi. How are you, Messi? Thank you so much for joining to stream, dear Messi. Mia, how are you, Mia? Thank you so much for joining, dear Mia. Anybody to do a super chat, guys? Leona, how are you, Leona? Moke, how are you, Moke? Please, guys, do the super chat to helping completing my goal. Adopan, thank you so much for joining, dear Adopan. Thank you so much for joining. Mackie, how are you, Mackie? Thank you so much for joining, dear Mackie. How are you, Mackie? Mahnur, how are you, Mahnur? Every respected person to write your name in the chat, guys. Alize, how are you, Alize? Thank you so much for joining, Alize. Esther, how are you, Esther? Thank you so much for joining to stream, dear Esther. Thank you so much for your joining. Lara Raj, how are you, dear Lara Raj? Ozur, how are you, Ozur? Thank you so much for Oznur, how are you, Oznur? Jani, how are you, Jani? Thank you so much for joining to stream, dear Jani. A lot of love and respect for you, Jani. It's me, Sarah. How are you, pretty Sarah? Thank you so much for joining, dear Sarah. A lot of love and respect for you, joining. Azura, how are you, Azura? Thank you so much for joining, dear Azura. Felix, how are you, dear Felix? Thank you so much for joining, dear Felix. Remember me, Sarah. I write your name, Sarah. How are you, Sarah? Thank you so much for your joining, my dear. A lot of love and respect for your joining. to write your name in the chat, guys. Hurry up to write your name in the chat, guys. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you so much for the handout, Christine. Thank you. Christine, can you send a one big gift for my appreciation, my dear? Yeah, laughing disco is my dream gift. If someone can send, guys. Mariam, how are you, Mariam? Merami, how are you, Merami? Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for your joining. Every respected member have to write your name in the chat, guys. Jannat, how are you, dear Jannat? Thank you so much for joining, dear Jannat. Jamal, how are you, dear Jamal? Thank you so much for joining, Jamal. Please, guys, send the laughing disco, do the super chat. Grace, how are you, Grace? Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much, Sarah. Sarah, love you, Sarah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Sarah, please send a laughing disco, dear Sarah. Out of lost it. Play a big gift, my dear. Micah, hurry, Micah. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you. Every person to write your name in the chat, guys. Yeah, guys, to send the laughing disco, do the super chat, guys. Daddy, how are you, dear Daddy? Thank you so much for joining, Daddy. Shani, how are you, dear Shani? Thank you so much for joining to City. Every respected member have to write your name in the chat, guys. To do the super chat, Julia, how are you, Julia? Thank you so much for joining to City, Julia. Sandy, how are you, dear Sandy? Thank you so much for joining, Sandy. How are you, Sandy? Yunchi, how are you, Yunchi? Thank you so much for joining to City, dear Yunchi. Please, guys, Manoon, how are you, Manoon? Thank you so much for joining to City, dear Manoon. Darling, how are you, darling? Thank you so much for joining, dear darling. A lot of love and respect for you joining. Ari, how are you, Ari? Thank you so much for joining. Please, guys, do the super chat. Camera, how are you, Camera? Thank you so much for joining to City, dear Camera. Maria, how are you, dear Maria? Thank you so much for joining, dear Maria. Dalan, I write your name, Maria. Dalan, looks that I have write your name. It's not fair. You are. It's listen. Every person listen, guys. Just wait to writing your name. Every person listen. Please don't spam. Just you have to look on the screen. I have almost written all the names. Almost. Don't spam, guys. Please, guys. Mass, how are you, Mass? Thank you so much for joining, dear Mass. Arjun, how are you, Arjun? Thank you so much for joining to a city, dear Arjun. Ortisa, how are you, Ortisa? Thank you so much for joining, Ortisa. Abe, how are you, Abe? To write your name in the chat, guys. Halil, how are you, Halil? Thank you so much for joining, Halil. Daddy, how are you, Daddy? Thank you so much for joining, dear Daddy. Aleph, how are you, Aleph? Thank you so much for joining, dear Aleph. Brocky, how are you, Brocky? Thank you so much for joining, Brocky. Amber, how are you, Amber? Thank you so much for joining to a city, dear Amber. A lot of love. and respect for you joining. Sevgi, how are you dear Sevgi? Thank you so much for joining to Sevgi. Malaki, how are you Malaki? Thank you so much for joining dear Malaki. How are you Malaki? Leomina, how are you Leomina? Thank you so much for joining dear Leomina. Gorham, how are you Gorham? Thank you so much for joining to Sitterim dear Gorham. Camber, how are you Camber? Thank you so much dear Camber. Jacqueline, how are you Jacqueline? Thank you so much for joining to Sitterim dear Jacqueline. Every respected member have to write your name in the chat guys, making a like and subscribing to the channel. The spamming person is going timeout. Spamming person is going timeout. Spamming person is going timeout. Vanis, how are you Vanis? Thank you so much. Vanessa, how are you Vanessa? Thank you so much for joining Vanessa. Dallin, I write your name many times, you will be got the timeout, yeah. Dallin, you will be got the timeout. Here is your name. It's a daddy, Dallin, Dallin, let me write your name once again, Dallin. Hi Asmar, thank you so much for joining. Omar, how are you Omar? Miss, how are you dear Miss? Thank you so much for joining Miss. Rabia, how are you Rabia? Leo, how are you dear Leo? Thank you so much for joining to Sitterim dear Leo. A lot of love and respect for you joining. Asma, how are you Asma? Thank you so much for joining. Please guys, someone do a super chat guys. Davran, how are you Davran? Thank you. Any Superman is going to do a super chat guys. Noor, how are you Noor? April, how are you April? Please someone do a super chat guys. Kale, how are you Kale? Thank you so much for joining to Sitterim. Kale, how are you Kale? Ale, how are you dear Ale? Thank you so much for joining to Sitterim dear Ale. A lot of love and respect for you joining dear Ale. Thank you so much dear Ale. Karma, how are you dear Karma? Thank you so much for joining to Sitterim. Emma, how are you dear Emma? Thank you so much for joining dear Emma. How are you dear Emma? Thank you so much. Nick, how are you Nick? Thank you so much for joining to Sitterim dear Nick. To write your name in the chat. Emma, I write your name. POB, how are you POB? Please guys send the laughing disco, do the super chat guys. Nole, how are you Nole? To write your name in the chat guys. Sareen, how are you Sareen? Thank you so much for joining to Sitterim dear Sareen. Rose, how are you Rose? Thank you so much for joining dear Rose. Lala, how are you Lala? How are you Lala? Thank you so much for joining dear Lala. Bios, how are you Bios? Thank you so much for joining dear Bios. Salma, how are you, Salma? Every respected people have to write your name in the chat. Robert, how are you, Robert? Thank you so much for joining to City Rim, dear Robert. And Leora, how are you, Leora? Thank you so much for joining to City Rim, dear Leora. Lorcan, how are you, Lorcan? Thank you so much for joining, Lorcan. Grandmas, okay, Grandmas, how are you, Grandmas? Every respected people has to write your name in the chat. Manol, how are you, Manol? Thank you so much for joining Twisted to Rim, dear Manol. How are you, Manol? Please, guys, someone do a super chat, guys. How are you, Manol? Azuya, how are you, Azuya? Thank you so much for joining, Azuya. Mia, how are you, Mia? Thank you so much for joining Twisted Terrain. Megan, how are you, Megan? Please, someone do a super chat for my appreciation, guys. Santiago, how are you, Santiago? Thank you so much for joining, Santiago. Mia, I read your name, my dear Mia. Looks that. Kale, how are you, Kale? Oba, how are you, Obe? Alina, how are you, dear Alina? Thank you so much for joining Twisted Terrain. Junior, how are you, Junior? Thank you so much for joining, dear Junior. Please, guys, someone do the super chat. And Ruby, how are you, Ruby? And send the laughing disco, guys. Matthew, how are you, Matthew? Thank you so much for joining Twisted Terrain, Matthew. How are you, Matthew? Adeline, how are you, dear Adeline? Thank you so much for joining Twisted Terrain, Adeline. Kale, how are you, dear Kale? Thank you so much for joining Twisted Terrain, dear Kale. How are you, Kale? In, how are you, In? Thank you so much for joining Twisted Terrain, dear In. Anthony, how are you, Anthony? Thank you so much for joining Twisted Terrain, dear Anthony. Devjad, how are you, Devjad? How are you, Devjad? Thank you so much for joining, Devjad. All Jad, how are you, all Jad? Daman, how are you, Daman? Thank you so much for joining, Daman. Please, guys, encourage the likes. And yeah, Jenna, Janari, how are you, Janari? Janariel, thank you so much, Janari. Lara, how are you, Lara? Yasin, how are you, Yasin? Sorry, Yasmin. Ade, how are you, Ade? Please, guys, do the super chat to write your name in the chat, guys. Erasi, how are you, Erasi? Thank you so much for joining Twisted Terrain, dear Erasi. Marlene, how are you, dear Marlene? Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dev Jar. Thank you. God bless you, my lovely brother. Thank you. Thank you so much. I have to write your name once again, Dev Jar. Thank you. Thank you, Dev Jar. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, my lovely brother. Thank you. Everybody to do the super chat, guys. Alvin, how are you, dear Alvin? Devjat, can you do one pink here? Alvin, how are you, Alvini? Thank you so much for joining, Alvini. Thank you so much. Uh, Carlos, how are you, Carlos? Thank you so much for joining, Carlos. Lily, how are you, dear Lily? Guys, do the super chat, guys. Lily, how are you, Lily? Jack Seeley, how are you, Jack Seeley? Thank you so much for joining, Jack Seeley. How are you, Jack Seeley? Maid, how are you, Maid? Thank you so much, Maid. Lara, how are you, Lara? Thank you so much for joining to City Rim, Lara. Ruby, how are you, Ruby? Every respected member have to write your name in the chat, making the like and subscribing to the channel. Joshua, how are you, Joshua? Thank you so much for joining to the City Rim, Joshua. How are you, Joshua? Thank you so much for your joining. Every respected member have to write your name in the chat, guys. Lana, how are you, dear Lana? Thank you so much for joining, dear Lana. A lot of love and respect for your joining. Megan, how are you, Megan? Thank you so much for joining, dear Megan. A lot of love and respect for your joining. To write your name in the chat, guys. Adonis, how are you, Adonis? Thank you so much for joining, dear Adonis. How are you, Adonis? Bala, how are you, Bala? Thank you so much for joining, dear Bala. Hurry up, guys, to write your name in the chat, making the like and subscribing to the channel. Katon, how are you, Katon? Thank you so much for joining, dear Katon. Every respected person have to write your name in the chat, guys. Johnny, Grayson, how are you, Grayson? Thank you so much for joining, Grayson. Please, guys, do the super chat, guys. Johnny, how are you, Johnny? Thank you so much for joining to City Rim, Johnny. How are you, Johnny? Liusa, how are you, Liusa? Please, someone do a super chat, guys. Yonji, how are you, dear Yonji? Manon, how are you, Manon? Sophia, how are you, Sophia? Max, how are you, Max? Please, someone do the super chat, guys, and send the laughing disco. Marlene, how are you, Marlene? How are you, Marlene? Marlene, can you do the super chat for the today appreciation, my dear? Yeah, to make a small donation to help me completing my goal. Thank you, my dear. Connor, how are you, Connor? Raven, how are you, dear Raven? Raven, how are you, Raven? Yeah, guys, to help me completing my goal, guys. Jama, how are you, Jama? Thank you, Jama. Kale, how are you, Kale? Thank you so much for joining, Kale. Ali, how are you, dear Ali? How are you, Ali? Can you put the brother name? Why not, my dear? Why not? Why not? Terrestin, how are you, Terrestin? Jenny, I'm writing your last name, okay? Janini, I'm writing your last name, okay? Then you will be get the time out from here. Alex, sorry, Alex, please, guys, click on the money icon. Yeah, guys, if you are new in the page, please click on the money icon. Yeah, guys, click on the money icon to do the super chat, guys. Devon, how are you, Devon? Thank you so much for joining. I'm laughing so hard. Why you are laughing, my dear? Sadie, how are you, dear Sadie? Holly, how are you, Holly? Roman, how are you, Roman? Kale, please, guys, do the super chat, guys, please. Kale, Carrie. Coco. Why you are laughing? Yode, how are you, Yode? Alisa, how are you, Alisa? Thank you so much for joining, dear Alisa. Go, how are you, dear Govio? Govio, how are you, Govio? Manol, how are you, Manol? Anara, how are you, Anara? Thank you so much for joining, dear Anara. A lot of love and respect for you joining. Adore, how are you, Adore? Thank you so much for joining, Adore. To write your name in the chat, guys. Kathleen, how are you, dear Kathleen? Kathleen, thank you so much for joining to sit to rim, dear Kathleen. Lee, how are you, Lee? Thank you so much for joining, dear Lee. To write your name in the chat, guys. Rocky, how are you, Rocky? Thank you so much for joining Twisted to Rim, dear Rocky. Mahdiar, how are you, Mahdiar? Thank you so much for joining Twisted to Rim, Mahdiar. Catherine, how are you, Catherine? Thank you so much for joining, Catherine. Brian, how are you, Brian? Thank you so much for joining, Brian. Lichel, how are you, dear Lichel? How are you, Lichel? Ale, how are you, Ale? Please, guys, someone do a super chat, guys. How are you, dear Ale? And how are you, Anne? Yeah, guys, make a small donation for completing my goal. Jamila, how are you, Jamila? Hamza, how are you, Hamza? Yeah, guys, to help to completing my goal, guys. And also I have to write your name in the chat. Click on the money icon to do the super chat, guys. Jamila, I write your name there. And Jerry Marsh, how are you, Jerry Marsh? How are you, Jerry Marsh? Thank you so much for joining to sit to ring, Jerry Marsh. Jeremiah, how are you, Jeremiah? James, how are you, James? Thank you so much for joining to sit to ring, James. To write your name in the chat, guys. Kundil, how are you, dear Kundil? Thank you so much for joining to sit to ring. Yasamin, how are you, Yasamin? Juliet, how are you, Juliet? Thank you so much for joining to sit to ring, dear Juliet. How are you, Juliet? To write your name in the chat, guys, making the like and subscribing to the channel. Every respected person have to write your name in the chat, guys. Alex, how are you, dear Alex? Thank you so much for joining, Alex. Afif, Dalan, how are you, Dalan? Please, guys, someone do the super chat or send the laughing disco, guys. Afifa, how are you, Afifa? Ryder, how are you, dear Ryder? Thank you so much for joining, dear Ryder. London, how are you, dear London? Thank you so much for joining to sit to ring, dear London. Kenza, how are you, Kenza? Thank you so much for joining, Kenza. Helle, how are you, dear Helle? Thank you so much for joining to sit to ring. Malaka, how are you, dear Malaka? How are you, Malaka? Thank you so much for joining, dear Malaka. Jonah, how are you, dear Jonah? Thank you so much for joining to sit to ring, dear Jonah. Marek, how are you, Marek? Thank you so much for joining, dear Marek. Mia, how are you, Mia? Thank you so much for joining, Mia. Jana is your sister. Oh, that's great. Monica, I write your name, Monica. Thank you so much for joining. Olivia, how are you, Olivia? Please, somebody do the super chat, guys, and send the laughing disco. Declan, how are you, Declan? Thank you so much for joining to sit to ring, Declan. How are you, Declan? Mimi, how are you, dear Mimi? Thank you so much for joining to sit to ring. Amy, how are you, dear Amy? Tony, how are you, Tony? Please, somebody do the super chat, guys, please. Can you do Christina? Yeah, why not, my dear? Just give me a while. Let me give you the time out to the spamming person. Yeah. Hi, pretty. How are you, pretty? Thank you so much for joining Twisted Terrain. Mommy, how are you, pretty mommy? Thank you so much for joining, mommy. How are you, mommy? Right, Mimi twice. Okay, Mimi. Can you do the super chat, my dear? Yes, I have Instagram, Jenny. I have Instagram, Jenny. Oh my God, thank you. Bear Bernardo. What is your Instagram name? Let me write it down here. Let me write it here by right pen. Yeah, looks that I'm writing. Yeah, I am right. The Christina. Yeah, it's Nazio triple L. Okay, triple L 0131. It's my Instagram. 0131. Okay, you can also get the screenshot. Yeah, you can also to get the screenshot of this one. It's my Instagram. Yeah, Nuzzle. Okay. Okay, you have to text me. I will follow you. Okay, dear. You have to text me. I will follow you. Varine, hurry, Varine. Please, guys, someone do a super chat, guys. Someone do a super chat, guys. Where are you from? I'm from Pakistan, my dear. Vanchi, your icon name. Okay. Okay, my dear. I will look and follow you back. Okay. Vonhi, how are you, Vonhi? Samar, how is Samar? How are you, Samar? Anybody can do the super chat. Jenny, can you do the super chat for the? I wish I will send you the social media. I have only a WhatsApp. Cute Mimi, where are you from watching, Mimi? Why you have only WhatsApp, you Mimi? Happy, how are you, Happy? Mimi, can you do the super chat for the today? Mimi, where are you from watching? Happy, I write your name, my dear. Abiha, how are you, Abiha? Thank you so much. I'm actually Arabic but live in the UK, so you should do a donation, Mimi. You are Arabic. I'm also your Muslim brother. You have for my support to do a small donation. You have to do how much is gonna get. As much as you can, my dear. I will follow you after the stream, my dear. Yeah, you're Muslim. You make a donation. Click on the money icon. Click on the money icon to do a super chat for my appreciation. For my support. To write your name in the chat. Hurry up, guys, to write in. I can take your number and joking. I was not giving. I can take your number. I'm joking. Yeah, why not, my dear? You have to comment on any video I will give you. You should have to install. No, dear. Why I have got angry? Why I have got angry? Okay, sure. Yeah, you have to also to comments on any video. Okay, on any video. And then are you have to you have to post on your community. I will share it. No worry. I'm sorry to say that, but if you have if or I cannot take a number, I do not want to cause problem. If you are married. No, no, I'm not, my dear. Yalle, how are you, dear Yalle? Thank you so much for joining to stream, Yalle. Raphael, how are you, Raphael? Thank you so much for joining to stream, dear Raphael. Kalesan, how are you, Kalesan? Talk a lot, but I just want to make a problem. No worry, no worry, Mimi, no worry. Kalesan, thank you so much for joining, Kalesan. Harley, how are you, Harley? You're the best. Thank you, man. Have a good night. Have a good night. Can you do the super chat, man? Here, nice of. Thank you, Mimi. Listen, you have also to get the screenshot of this one. Okay, you have to get the screenshot of this one. If you did not have to, may you it's very easy for the Instagram. Okay, you make an Instagram account, just sign up on your email and then have to text on my Instagram. Nazul NAZU triple L 0131. But I told you I don't use Insta. I mean you should have to create for a once. Then you should have to delete it. You have to share the number. Yeah, then you will delete it. Selena. Let 1 second, Mimi. I will try. Mimi, 1 second. Let me give you the number on here. Let me give you. Okay, Mimi. Mimi, are you here? Danny, how are you, Danny? Where do you live? Okay, Mimi, it's my WhatsApp. Okay. Now you should get the screenshot. Yeah, it's me. It's me, SK. Okay. It's me, SK. Have you got the screenshot? Then I will delete it. Lucy, how do you Lucy? I have to write it by yeah, by SK. You will be looking in a below. Okay, now have you got? Okay, I got it. Okay, you have to got it. Thank you. If you got it, then I will be going off right now, my dear. Have you got it? If you have to got it, then tell me here. Jaden, how are you, Jaden? Thank you so much for joining to stream, dear Jaden. Mimi, have you got it? Colin, how are you, dear Colin? Thank you so much for joining to Ring Kalini. Harper, how are you, Harper? Thank you, Harper. Zai, how are you, Zai? Mimi, are you here? I didn't got it. I save it. Okay. Thank you. You should have to text me right now. I will save your number. Okay. Thank you. I'm gonna off here. I'm gonna off here right now. Valentina. Thank you, Valentina. Valentina. Patty. Thank you. Hector. How are you, Hector? Thank you. Gora. Sorry, Nisa. Okay, guys, I'm going off right now. See you on the next live session, guys. Okay. Thank you, Mimi, and everyone, guys.